I'd been through a difficult breakup. My girlfriend had cheated on me, and I had taken it very badly. The evenings were the worst. Sat on my own in my flat, lonely and bored, so I decided to get a job selling tickets in the local movie theater. I thought it would help to occupy my mind and bring in a little extra cash now the ex had moved out and I had to pay all the bills myself. I lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, so I'd see lots of friends while I worked. It was nice. I definitely made the right decision. Unfortunately, my ex-girlfriend also came along with her new boyfriend every Wednesday night. It was like a kick in the teeth every time, but I just had to grin and bear it. But other than that, the job suited me well. But one day, there was a tragedy. Old Mrs. Everett was watching Jurassic Park when she suddenly had a massive heart attack and died, right there in seat C7. Some say she was terrified to death when the dinosaurs appeared, but to my mind, her 40-cigarette-a-day habit had finally caught up with her. She was 82. She'd done well considering, and at least she died in the best seat in the house. The next day was equally as eventful. A little boy tripped as he left the building and very nearly fell under a car. His poor little face was so badly grazed. I knew that loose tile was our responsibility, so I immediately tried to make amends by refunding their tickets. I just needed to get the stubs and I could give them a cash refund. I noticed with mild curiosity that the boy had been sitting in C7, the seat where Mrs. Everett had passed away. Once I'd noticed this connection, I started paying more attention to who sat in that seat, and I felt like I might be going mad, but bad things certainly did seem to happen more regularly to those who sat in C7. An old school friend lost his job. Mr. Hall, who had taught me at school, was diagnosed with cancer, and a teenager fell off her bike and broke her leg. All this could easily have been a coincidence, but it just kept on happening. Sometimes it was small things, but whenever anyone mentioned any personal misfortune, I'd check the list I'd made of who had sat in C7, and more often than not, their name would be on it. The butcher cut off his own thumb, and a boy from the lumber yard was involved in a car crash. Everyone talked about how the town seemed to be having a run of bad luck. I mentioned my theory about seat C7 to my boss. I even suggested he remove that seat, but he dismissed it as nonsense. He wasn't going to lose money by removing a seat because I was superstitious, especially when it was the best seat in the cinema, right in the middle with a great view of the screen. I did, however, notice that he himself never sat in C7. It turned into something of a macabre hobby. Someone would sit in C7, and the next time I saw them, I'd always make a point of asking how they were. More often than not, some sort of misfortune would have befallen them. Illness, bereavement, accidents, or just plain bad luck. Some of the C7ers, as I came to call them, I never did see again, and I spent time wondering if something awful had happened to them. Some, I heard, had left town suddenly. Others couldn't take living in this miserable town any longer and moved on. I hope their lives turned around when they were far away from seat C7, but I guess I'll never know. The whole thing gave me the creeps. It was just so weird, but there was actually one benefit. On a Wednesday, when my ex turned up with her new boyfriend in town, I was always sure to give her the best seat in the house. After all, she deserved it. I just moved back to my hometown in Arizona after a decade of trying to make it as a costume designer in LA. My hometown is a lot cheaper than LA, so I was able to work as a waiter and make enough money for a pretty good place. Overall, it was an okay situation, but I was still depressed that I had given up on my dream. All my childhood friends had moved away, so I needed to figure out how to meet new people. I signed up for a local cinema club, where people would meet once a week to get drinks and watch classic films at this really run-down art house theater not too far from my place. I was a bit nervous about it, because I'm not great at socializing. But when I got there, I met the organizer and a couple other people who seemed really excited for new blood. I also met this woman named Tanya, who seemed a bit too eager to be my friend. She said she was a costume designer too. She worked on a bunch of local plays. More than that, she said that she was an aspiring filmmaker and was planning to self-fund a low-budget horror movie. Her goal, as mine had been, was to make it big in LA. I had a weird feeling about her, but I figured that she could maybe hook me up with a side job or something. So when it came time for our group to watch the movie, we ended up sitting together. About 30 minutes in, she left to use the bathroom. She was gone for a while, and when she came back, she looked like she was in shock. Her face was pale, and she couldn't stop shaking. She sat back down and whispered that a man in a ski mask had attacked her in the bathroom. She showed me a fresh cut along her arm where the man had slashed her with a knife. I couldn't believe this. This was a sleepy desert town. That kind of thing would never happen here. I asked her why she didn't call the police. She said she did. The police would get here in 5 minutes, but she was too afraid to wait in the lobby alone. She asked if I'd wait with her until the cops came. I didn't understand why she didn't want to tell the others. If there was a psychopath somewhere in the theater, shouldn't she tell everyone? She explained that the man had run off. None of us were in immediate danger, and she didn't want to ruin the movie for everyone else. I was reluctant to go with her. I barely knew her, but she seemed so panicked and helpless that I eventually agreed. We snuck back into the lobby, which was completely empty. The 3 workers that had been there when we entered were nowhere to be seen. Almost immediately, a policeman walked in. His badge said that his name was Officer Bradford. He listened as Tanya told him the story that she had told me. He nodded gravely, explaining that there had been other reports in this area of a man wearing a ski mask who attacked women. He assured her that they'd find him as long as she came down to the station to give them all the information she had. Tanya quickly agreed, but then she asked if I could come with them. I told them that I didn't see anything, but the officer said that any information could help them. He made it seem like I didn't have a choice. I had to go with them. Afraid to argue with a cop, I followed Tanya and Officer Bradford into the parking lot. Right away, I knew that something was wrong. He was leading us toward a windowless van, not a cop car. The officer noticed my concern and said that the van was for undercover operations. He tapped on his badge and told me to trust him. That's when I noticed that his badge was larger than it should have been, and it lacked a badge number. As a costume designer, I knew what a real police badge looked like, and his was definitely fake. Looking closer, I realized that his uniform used the wrong fabric and had several inaccurate markings. Officer Bradford wasn't a real cop at all. Acting casually, I pulled Tanya aside and whispered that we had to run back inside. She looked at me for a long moment and then shouted at the fake policeman, "Get him!" The officer ran toward me, but I raced back inside and blocked the entrance with a trash can. Tanya and the man pounded on the glass doors and demanded that I let them in. I pushed against the trash can to make sure they couldn't get inside, and with my free hand, I called 911 and told them that someone was impersonating an officer. When I looked back out the windows, I saw Tanya and Officer Bradford give up and walk back to the van. When they slid open the door, I could see other people inside. Very quickly, the van drove off. When the real police came, I explained exactly what happened. With his help, we were able to piece together that Tanya had never been attacked at all. She and that officer had used the story as an excuse to lure me outside and kidnap me. I didn't know what their ultimate plan was, but I remembered that she told me about a horror movie she wanted to make. Was that the reason? Did she want to use me for some kind of snuff film? After the officer got all my information, he said they'd find them, but there's still been no update. And the worst part is that the 3 theater workers have been missing ever since. There are 3 theaters in my city, but people only go to 2 of them. The third is inside a dead mall in the sketchy part of town. I hadn't been there in years. Honestly, I didn't even know it was still open. Then last week, my boyfriend Danny and I were shopping at the supermarket when this old lady ran over to us and handed me 2 free passes to the theater. It happened so fast that I didn't even get to see her face before she was gone. I wasn't interested in the tickets, but Danny has always been extremely frugal. He'd never pass up anything free. The passes expired that day, so it was either now or never. We argued for a bit, but then I gave in, like I always do, and he drove us over to the cinema. We didn't even know what was playing. Danny just said that we'd watch whatever was on. When we got there, we had to walk through the old mall. Most of the stores were closed. Aside from the theater, the only businesses that were open were dollar stores and pawn shops. Aside from the workers, Danny and I didn't see a single other customer in the entire building. At the entrance to the theater, an old man greeted us at the ticket counter. He was wearing an old-fashioned usher uniform. He asked if we wanted to see the 6 o'clock show. That was 10 minutes away, so it would be perfect timing. I asked what the movie was, because there were no posters anywhere, and he got angry and shouted, "Do you want to see the movie or not?" I had a really bad feeling. I wanted to leave, but Danny pushed me to the side and gave the man our free passes. The man took them and tore off the stubs. He told us to go to screen number 1. Danny wrapped his arm around me and guided me inside the theater. The lobby looked like it hadn't been changed or cleaned since I was here as a kid. All the decorations were old and covered in dust. The frames that would normally show posters of new releases were all blank, except for one with a pure black poster and one word written in white: Judgment. I'd never heard of a movie called Judgment before, and the poster had no other information on it. I turned to Danny and told him that I wanted to leave. He got a little huffy and said, "Fine, you can go if you want, but I'm not." I knew better than to argue with him. I'd been with Danny long enough to know that he'd be sulking for days if he didn't get his way. Even if he was as creeped out as I was, he'd refuse to back down. He started walking into screen number 1, and I followed. There were only 6 other people in the audience, all couples. Each couple sat in different rows and in total silence. Danny picked a spot near the front, but he had to move over a couple of seats because the ones he chose were broken. Most of the chairs were. It was 5:57, 3 minutes before the movie was supposed to start, when someone whispered at us from 2 rows back. I turned around and saw Lindsay, one of my friends from high school. She asked me what we were doing here. I told her about the free passes, and she said that the exact same thing happened to her. She glanced at her boyfriend nervously. I knew she was weirded out by this place too, and I knew that her boyfriend was forcing her to come, just like mine was. He had a tight grip around her wrist. With just 1 minute before the show started, the old curtain spread open to reveal a torn and dusty screen. I don't know what set me off. Maybe it was the horrible noise that the curtains made when they opened. Maybe it was the annoyed look on my boyfriend's face. Maybe it was the dry, dead smell that filled the room. Whatever the reason, I couldn't stay there any longer. All my instincts were telling me to leave. I whispered to Danny that I had to go. I was too scared. Danny glared at me and said, "Yeah? Then why don't you leave?" So I did. For the first time in our relationship, I went against Danny and left. I'd wait for him in the mall. I knew that he'd be mad at me for doing this, but I couldn't stand to be in that theater anymore. Even if Judgment was the greatest movie ever made, I wasn't going to see it. I went back through the lobby, but the old man wasn't there. Then I found a dollar store in the mall that didn't seem too gross, and I spent 90 minutes wandering through the aisles and looking at whatever they had. I didn't buy anything. I saw 3 other customers in there, all getting cigarettes. Once I waited long enough, I went back to the theater, but all the lights were off. The glass doors were closed and covered in black paper. The theater looked like it had been closed down for a long time. I tried to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. I banged on the glass until the janitor came over and told me to stop. I told him that my boyfriend was watching a movie inside, and he laughed. He said, "Miss, that theater's been closed for 5 years. I went to other shops in the mall, but every worker told me the same thing. The theater was closed. I eventually reported everything to the police. I even gave them my ticket stub, but they haven't been any help. I called Lindsay's number, but nobody answered, and I can't find Danny anywhere. It's been 8 days. I don't know if I'll ever find out what happened to them or what that strange movie was about. I'm just glad I left when I did."